Good afternoon, everyone. Again, Selena Paley reporting live from Red Deer, Alberta. I'm here at the National Citizens Inquiry. I have here with me Mr. Dean Beaudry. We just heard his amazing testimony, which got a standing ovation. I noticed. It was so good. Dean is an expert in the area of risk analysis, risk management, risk mitigation, and what he was able to convey to us today was the best practices from an expert in the field as they related to the rollout of the pandemic and the vaccine mandate. So in your professional opinion, Dean, were the best practices when it comes to risk management shown at all through this process?
Well, shown is a good word, because I don't know what happened. I can only comment on the outcome. But I can also comment on the practices that I would or had experience with in my working life were not visible and would have produced different results than what we saw.
Right. Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. So the outcome that we saw, how would you explain that? What kind of risk management practices were used then based on the outcomes that we saw?
Well, I would say the outcome, when you do risk, you evaluate the risk that you're trying to mitigate, and mitigations are supposed to reduce the risk. And when you assess risk, you don't assess risk for one item. You look at the entire breadth of what you have in front of you. And in case of our nation, we have more than COVID to deal with. We have to deal with economics. We have to deal with business. We have to deal with travel. And so you got to look at what are all the priorities. And one of the things that I said in the I'm gonna have to start that over. Sorry. One of the things I said in the root cause is that we only looked at, or we put COVID as the kind of the only priority. And when you do that, you implement mitigations that have negative impacts on other parts of the world. And so if we look at the mitigations that were implemented for COVID, one was the vaccines. So vaccines turned out to be produce risk as well as possibly mitigate risk. I don't actually know. I don't have enough data to evaluate that. But it appears like for younger people, there was more risk added than there was mitigated through the vaccines. Lockdowns were a mitigation that were proven to not be effective in, by virtue of other countries didn't do mitigations and got similar results. So the mitigations had a negative impact on our economy and, really social justice. Another one was masks. You looked at an organization called Cochrane, and Cochrane is supposed to be the organization that settles medical disputes, and they've settled on masks made no difference whatsoever. Right. And yet from an educational perspective, like when you've got young people, you've got infants, where they get a lot of the information is from your face. And so if you look at some of the statistics around development of like early childhood development, the mitigations were a terrible failure. So basically we took a problem that was a medium risk for Canada and we turned it into an extreme risk by the mitigations or the actions that we took. And then on an individual basis, for almost all age groups, the vaccinations were not a helpful mitigation. And that's just according to the data that's provided on Health Canada websites and Alberta Health websites. So we took something that was a medium problem and we turned it into a much, much bigger problem, which is the opposite of what risk management is.
And by we, you mean?
I mean by the actions taken by the government.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. You know, you said something interesting there. You said that there's not enough data. I agree with you there. Why is there a suppression on the data, or why is this data not being encouraged to collect in this manner to now reduce the risk to Canadians who are suffering at the harm of the results of not using the best practices for risk mitigation in the first place? Does that make any sense?
Well, I can't explain why data isn't available. I don't have an answer to that.
But isn't this how we come to these conclusions though with data, right?
Well, I think the right way to come to conclusions isn't let's get one side's opinion and then let's get another side's opinion and let's cancel or call out the other person as some name or something like that. That's not the right way to do this. The right way is for all these different views to come together, and that's part of what I was saying in my presentation is we need all the stakeholders and all the different biases to come together and figure out what the right solution is. And another good question I got from the panel was about yeah. So I'm just having a brain fart.
That's okay. Can I interject for
Sure.
just a second? Because you mentioned that, you know, we saw a lot of the emotion come to the table and a lot of name calling, and it seemed unnecessary and quite confusing, to be honest. Like, aren't we dealing with a crisis here, a pandemic? Why are we bringing racism now and homophobia? And now we're talking about, you know, what was the other word that they used? Terror. We were called terrorists too. I mean, you talked a lot about the emotions part of it, and, you know, is the emotion part of it necessary in order to do this risk assessment? And using emotions in that way, like you referred to it as emotional blackmail, which I thought was perfect. That is the perfect description for what we encountered when we were trying to ask these questions, collect the information and the data without prejudice. We're just trying to ask some questions like you would do in order to get all the information to come up with your risk analysis, right?
Right. Yeah, no, emotion doesn't have a place in things that need to be logically and carefully dealt with, especially when you don't know where something is going. So COVID isn't actually a big risk. COVID is about the same risk as being involved in an accident in Canada. It's not a big risk, but it was a new risk, and new risks create fear, and fear is not helpful. And then if you stir up fear in your citizens, and you take actions that are divisive, well, that's the opposite of what we need to get to good solutions. Like we need to be calm. We need to have process. We have to remember what our values are as Canadians. As Canadians, we're not name callers. We're not angry. We're loving people that have been over the years very welcomed in other nations around the world. That's who we are. You take the convoy as an example. The convoy goes into Ottawa, and it's a family affair. They've got kids there. They've got bouncy castles. They've got all kinds of yeah. So there was two sides of the story to that, and one side, and I wasn't there, but I've watched lots of different news, and I can see two sides. One side said, this is just good, wholesome, wholehearted people raising an objection, and other people were against it. And I suppose for people in Ottawa it was inconvenient, but life can be inconvenient sometimes.
Well, I mean, especially if you're living in the city where the parliamentary buildings are situated. I mean, where else were people going to protest? That question came up a lot. We were not insensitive to the inconvenience and the noise that it caused them, but we felt that it was a fair exchange for the inconvenience that all of the Canadians were subjected to as a result of the, like you said, the implementation of this response to the pandemic.
Yeah. We're all citizens. We don't have to agree with each other. I remember a time, and it wasn't that long ago, where if someone had a different opinion, you might just say, well, it's a free country. And so it's allowed to have a different opinion. But we should also be able to defend our opinions with facts and information. And, you know, there was a lot of information, and most of the things in my experience, I didn't settle with mainstream media. I looked at as many different sources of information, and when I first realized that like how much deception was out there, I was shocked, and I went into shock for probably a couple weeks. I didn't realize what was going on, and so then I kind of doubled down, because what I do is I investigate. Like I was a lead investigator for incident investigations, and I started to investigate, and finding that it was very difficult to find a reliable source of information, and that was actually on both sides of the debate. So somewhere in the middle was a good answer and a reliable answer, and it wasn't what I was hearing from my own government, and I just unbelievably disappointed in our government. The actions have been so consequential on the negative side. It's hard to even imagine a competency level that low that would cause that, and I don't even believe that to be true. Like I believe, like I'm at the point now where I believe our government is damaging our nation intentionally.
I have to say that the common comment that I hear from a lot of people nowadays is they don't trust the government. This has eroded trust almost completely, and we understand why. You know, we understand why, but there's still a significant portion of the nation that feels their response to COVID was good, was appropriate. And so that is where I think my confusion lies. Is I have, you know, you're standing here, you've got all this experience when it comes to risk management. You're saying that they took what was a medium risk situation and made it worse, whereas there are people who feel their response was positive, was good, and they wouldn't have changed anything. So I'm wondering, you know, with respect to those people, how are they seeing such a different story than what we're seeing in front of us?
I would say they're not watching the National Citizens Inquiry. They need to watch the National Citizens Inquiry and see the harm that's been done and understand it. And this is a place where there is truth. People are sworn to tell the truth, and so how often do you get that in mainstream media? Mostly what you find is you hear a story, and then 3 months later it's a different story, and 3 months after that it's a third story. So watch the National Citizens Inquiry and see if your opinion remains the same. That's what I would advise people.
Great advice. You know, if we could just go back to the convoy a little bit, because I noted one of the questions that you got with respect to the emotional side of things, and she had said, you know, why do you think that there aren't more people asking why? And you said that the convoy was a way for us to do that, to ask that question to our government. Why? Did we get an answer? Well, we got an answer, but it wasn't the democratically, it wasn't the answer that we expected from a democratically run government. Let's just put it that way. And, you know, your comment about the convoy, you know, really resonated with me, because I feel the same. You said that watching the convoy unravel in the way that it did gave you hope to be Canadian or to feel Canadian again. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, when you're seeing your Canadian family suffer, and then you're seeing someone stand up on behalf of that suffering, that feels right. That feels Canadian. That feels like that's who we are. That's what we do. We stand up for people who are suffering. And so, yeah, that's why it made me feel Canadian.
That's wonderful. I felt that as well, and that was one of the things that I was hoping that we could convey just from our cameras in the minus 35 on the streets of Ottawa. Unfortunately, you know, the end of that protest, I mean, the way that it ended was okay, we'll go with tyrannical. Definitely, you know, unconstitutional, tyrannical. You know, but I think that you're right in that the testimonies that we're hearing at the NCI, they're not just people who've been adversely affected emotionally, physically, you know, been harmed in these ways, or financially, but rather expert testimony from doctors, from, you know, risk managers such as yourselves that have a plethora of experience, education, and intellect that, you know, if you were to have been consulted even one time during all of this, you know, it may have had a different outcome for everybody. You know, I think that whoever was being consulted through this is worth questioning at this point, because we're hearing now a conflicting story. We're hearing conflicting testimony, conflicting evidence from people who are just as credible, if not more. And we have to ask ourselves why. Why were these people also not consulted? Because if we're looking at both sides, right, both sides, we need to consider both sides in the equation logically, without emotion, you know, just to be able to get the job done in a way that doesn't further harm Canadians. And the exact opposite thing happened here. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would agree. I also don't want to lob grenades. I want to stop the fighting. I want to stop the division. So I disagree strongly with a lot of the things that happened, but I don't want to have that debate on media. The inquiry has invited people to come and talk and defend, and it's interesting that no one has come to defend. I find that really interesting. And so if you don't want to come to the inquiry, why don't we get together on some other venue? Get together and have a discussion. I've probably got part of the truth, and someone else might have another part of the truth, and together, or more than just someone else, several people together can probably get to what's really right and true. And don't we want to do that? And why wouldn't we want to do that?
That's just the question. Now we're just going to try to piece everything together because we're not getting all the information. We know that for sure. Yeah. We're getting pieces of the information. Some is true, maybe some not so true. So yes, getting all the information is key right now in order to identifying what those solutions can be to maybe mitigate further damage done, or at least provide some compensation to those people who have lost and suffered, who may have died, who may have lost their businesses, whose children might be permanently damaged. Like there's like a long list, you know, of things that have adversely, negatively come about, the decisions that were made from the top down in the tyrannical ways that you described. But you know, I think in terms of going forward, what solutions do you propose or see in front of you that might help lead us back to being Canadian again?
Well, in my talk, I talked about the consequence model being broken. We really do have a broken consequence model, and until that's fixed, we will continue. Not just COVID. There's new things coming. So until we fix the consequence model, where someone can make decisions that has negative impacts on others and just brush it off like it never happened, change the story, that sort of thing, that doesn't work. You know, business pays for everything in this nation, and in business, leaders have consequences. Leaders get fired if they don't perform. We don't have that capability with people in political positions. Once every 4 years we do. But what we've got is, you know, for example, MPs get a raise automatically every year. And so that would never occur in business, and business pays for it. That would never occur in business. So MP's compensation needs to be linked to performance. So,
Sorry, let us know in the comments.
so if you're yeah. So if you're over budget by 5%, let's roll back the MP's salary by 5%. Or if you're over budget, period, that year is not a pensionable year. There are things like that we ought to implement. They're really pipe dreams, because getting someone to choose a consequence intentionally, and that's basically how it's set up, that's a tough road.
Well, I see the MPs having to vote on something like that. Of course, they'd never never vote to get less money. I mean, I get that part.
But why shouldn't it be that way? It's that way in business. Business pays all the bills. Why shouldn't it be that way? So the consequence model is broken, and until we fix that, we're just going to get more of the same.
Is there any other information that you would like to provide to our viewers, to Canadians, with respect to moving forward?
Well, yeah, in my presentation I talked quite a bit about values. So have we lost our Canadian values? Do we really care about each other? Are we accountable? So I remember a time, I'm 61 years old, I remember a time when if a politician made a really bad move, they would hold themselves accountable and they would resign. So, that did happen in Alberta eventually after quite a lot of pressure. So there's been one consequence there. There was a consequence for the chief medical officer. So there's been a couple consequences in Alberta. But I haven't seen consequences anywhere else, and I think it's noble.
Well, the Toronto mayor resigned after the sexual allegations. We just saw that happen. But I hear what you're saying, and that's just a small example. But I think I know what you're alluding to here, and I think that has been the question for most people is, how is he even still, why hasn't he resigned? This has been the question for several months now. Chinese interference, the Emergencies Act, the harm to, the list goes on, and he's yet still maintaining his position. It's a mystery to us all. So I thank you very much for your comment there. In terms of moving forward, I agree. We really need to look at our values as Canadians. I think that the convoy helped us find them again.
It
invigorated, and it reminded us, like you said, what it feels to be, what it's like to feel. No, how did you say that? I don't want to quote you.
We just want to be Canadians.
That's right.
Yeah.
To feel Canadian again.
Yeah.
That's right. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Dean. I thought your testimony was fantastic, and hopefully it resonated with a lot of Canadians, and we look forward to some positive results as the NCI moves across Canada. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Take care. Thanks. Okay, you guys. Oh, I'm just going to close. I'll just close. Okay, guys. Sorry. Wow. My brain is full of such great information. I heard from amazing Canadians today, amazing people. It's giving me a renewed sense of hope. I hope it's giving you guys the same. I hope that it lights a fire in you to participate in some way to make it better, to, like Dean said, implement strategies, policies, committees that can hold those responsible accountable. That is going to be key to getting our democracy back to its original glory. Thank you so much for joining me today at the National Citizens Inquiry. Selena Paley reporting live from Red Deer, Alberta. Thank you so much. And if you like the content I'm bringing to you, donate at selenapaley.com. I appreciate you all.
Prime Gold Media.